This was supposed to be a moment of quiet dignity, a king's final courageous act of service. But behind the scenes, it was twisted into a brutal palace civil war, a story of love, duty, and a shocking betrayal whispered from inside the king's own marriage. Just 1 minute past 7 p.m, the autumn light was fading over Highgrove House. The nation held its breath, told to expect an announcement. But no one, and I mean no one, was prepared for what felt like a farewell. The cameras weren't pointed at the grand gates of Buckingham Palace. No, this was different. This was personal. They were aimed at a modest country estate because this wasn't a royal spectacle. This was something far more raw, far more human. King Charles emerged, and instantly the world could see something was wrong. He looked frail, his suit hanging loosely on a frame that seemed to have shrunk. He walked slowly, leaning heavily on a carved wooden cane, his hands trembling just enough for the world's cameras to capture the brutal truth he could no longer hide. Behind him, a single portrait of his mother, Queen Elizabeth II, was illuminated by a golden lamp. The symbolism was crushing. One monarch's light quietly passing to the next. His voice, when he began to speak, was steady, but it was heavy with the weight of a 70-year journey. For over 70 years, I have witnessed service, Charles began. And now, as time and health remind me of my humanity, I have chosen to ensure that service continues through my son, the Prince of Wales. The words hung in the air. A deafening silence fell across every pub, every living room in Britain. In that single earth-shattering sentence, Charles confirmed the devastating rumour that the palace had been desperately trying to suppress. This was the beginning of his withdrawal from public life. A quiet, heartbreaking transfer of power to Prince William. Can you even imagine that moment? Watching your father, your king, essentially announce his own decline to the entire world? At Windsor, Prince William watched the broadcast with Catherine by his side. As his father spoke, William closed his eyes and breathed out slow and heavy. It was the moment every heir secretly dreads. The moment where love for a father and duty to a crown collide in the most public, most painful way imaginable. Outside the palace gates, the crowds were already starting to gather. Some were crying, some were praying, but what they didn't know was that the king's emotional speech was only the beginning. The real chaos, the real betrayal was about to be unleashed. And what happened next will leave you stunned. You see, the hours and weeks leading up to this broadcast were filled with a terrifying unease. Whispers had been slithering through the corridors of Buckingham Palace for months. Anxious glances between aides, the king's schedule being quietly cleared. Changes so subtle, yet they screamed a truth louder than any official statement ever could. King Charles's health had been the subject of frantic speculation since the leaves began to turn. Sources inside the palace, speaking on the condition of absolute anonymity, revealed he was receiving treatment for a relapse of his lymphatic condition, a brutal private battle that he had tried to keep hidden from the world. Of course, the palace machine tried to spin it. Routine medical observation, they claimed, but those who knew the king, those who saw him up close, they saw the truth in his eyes. His famous energy was gone. Even his meticulously perfect handwriting had begun to shake. The man was fading, and everyone inside the walls knew it. And this is where the story takes a dark turn. Behind the scenes, a power vacuum was forming. Prince William had already started quietly stepping into his father's shadow. He was taking on the top secret government briefings, the confidential meetings. Courtiers who once bowed to Charles were now instinctively turning to William for decisions. It was a silent coup, driven not by ambition, but by necessity. But as William was stepping up, someone else was desperately trying to hold on to the old order. Someone who saw this transition not as a necessary act of a loving father, but as a threat to her own position. Queen Camilla. According to senior staff, she was furious about the idea of an announcement. While Charles was wrestling with his mortality, her primary concern was said to be controlling the narrative. One staffer later confided she feared that any hint of the king's fragility would invite questions about her own place in the New World Order. Think about that. Her husband is facing the end of his public life, and her alleged first thought is how it affects her. The tension between duty and denial was becoming explosive. The day before the announcement, the King's private secretary, Sir Clive Alderton, described the moment Charles requested the national address as the hardest conversation of my career. When asked what he planned to say, the King's reply was utterly heroic. I owe my son and my people the truth, not the illusion of forever. But Camilla was having none of it. That morning, she reportedly tried one last time to dissuade him. You don't have to do this now, she pleaded, her tone described as more desperate than loving. It will only invite chaos. And Charles, with a wisdom forged by a lifetime of waiting, murmured a line that will go down in history. Better chaos with honesty, he said, than silence without courage. The king had made up his mind. He knew this would change everything. As the cameras were being set up at Highgrove, he walked through the garden one last time, stopping to touch the rose bushes he and Diana had planted decades ago. A final silent tribute to the woman who first gave him his heir. When the broadcast began, a hush didn't just fall over Britain. It fell across the world. Because what the public saw was a king. But what insiders saw was a man breaking free from the clutches of a wife who, it's claimed, wanted to keep him on the throne, no matter the cost to his health. And that's not even the worst part. The real fallout was yet to come. Even before the King's broadcast, the battle lines within the family were being drawn. It was Princess Anne, ever the pragmatist, the rock of the family, who first voiced the question everyone was terrified to ask. What happens if he cannot continue? She asked in a closed-door meeting. She had seen this before. The slow, painful decline of their mother, Queen Elizabeth II, the quiet chaos that consumed the palace as they tried to pretend everything was normal. But this was different. This wasn't just a monarch. This was her brother. Discussions behind closed doors grew more urgent. William was now attending Privy Council briefings in his father's place. The Prime Minister's weekly audiences, while still formally for His Majesty, now increasingly involved William's council. And yet the official palace statements were pure fiction. The king remains in good spirits, they read. It was a lie designed to protect one thing, the image of the crown. And one person was allegedly directing it all. Sources claim Queen Camilla personally urged the communications teams to protect the crown, not expose it. It's a chilling choice of words. It suggests she saw her husband's illness not as a human tragedy, but as a PR problem, a vulnerability to be managed. Is this what the monarchy has become? An institution so terrified of the truth that it would rather project a fantasy than show a moment of human weakness? Let me know what you think in the comments. Is this strength, or is it a shocking form of deception? But the king could feel the walls closing in. He knew the truth had to come from him. On October 17th, he asked to see William alone. The two men walked through the rose garden, a father leaning on his cane, a son walking in silence. You've been carrying more than you should, Charles said, his voice quiet. But that's what happens when love and responsibility meet. They weigh the same, but feel very different. William simply nodded, his eyes wet. This wasn't about politics. This was a goodbye. A father giving his son permission to become the man he was always destined to be. That night, as the cameras were prepared, the mood at Windsor was electric. Catherine found her husband pacing his study. He's going to do it, William murmured. He's actually going to tell them. He's going to tell the world. I'm next. Catherine, his ever-present anchor, rose and rested a hand on his arm. Then let him, she said softly. He's not giving you a throne. He's giving you his faith. The next evening, the broadcast began. And as the king's frail but proud image appeared on screen, he delivered the line that would detonate a crisis. "As time humbles me," he said, "I have come to understand that strength is not found in holding on, but in knowing when to pass the torch." For a split second, the camera caught Queen Camilla's reaction. Her eyes narrowed, her lips pressed into a thin, hard line of fury. It was only a moment, but it was enough. The entire world saw it. The carefully staged unity had cracked, revealing the ice-cold tension just beneath the surface. While the crowds outside wept and a nation applauded its king's courage behind the doors of Highgrove House, the first shots of a new royal war were about to be fired, and the king's greatest battle wouldn't be with his health. It would be with his own wife. In the immediate aftermath of the king's speech, Highgrove House became the quiet, cold centre of a global storm. Every news network on earth flashed the same headline: King Charles confirms Prince William as future head of the monarchy. But inside that silent sitting room, the broadcast calm shattered into a million pieces. Charles sat in silence, the adrenaline finally draining from his body. His hands, now visibly trembling, reached for a cup of tea. "It's done," he whispered, more to himself than to anyone in the room. Across from him, Queen Camilla stood by the window, her back turned to him, her posture rigid with fury. "You didn't have to say it like that," she said, her voice dangerously low. "You've made it sound like a farewell." Charles looked up at her, his expression weary. "It was, Camilla," he replied softly. "The crown must outlive its keeper. You know that better than anyone." She spun around, her face a mask of disbelief and anger. "I know what the world will make of it. They'll think you've surrendered, or worse, that I pushed you to it." "Then let them think," he replied, a profound sadness in his voice. "History will be kinder than gossip." The air in the room grew thick with a cold, unspoken distance. For all her carefully cultivated strength, Camilla had built her entire life on being next to power. To watch her husband willingly handed over, even symbolically, was to watch her own position crumble before her very eyes. Meanwhile, at Windsor Castle, William and Catherine sat in stunned silence, replaying the speech. The words were beautiful, poetic even, but hearing them spoken aloud made the crushing weight of inheritance terrifyingly real. William rubbed his temples, the pressure building behind his eyes. "He's turned a lifetime into a sentence," he muttered. "And now it's mine." Catherine moved closer, her presence a silent fortress. "He hasn't left you a burden, Will. He's left you a chance to lead without breaking." But the storm was just gathering, because what happened next was not an act of a loving family rallying together. It was an act of sabotage. Just hours after the king bared his soul to the world, Queen Camilla's private bitter comments were leaked to the press. A senior palace staffer whose identity remains protected claimed she told close friends, "The king is not thinking clearly. He's being guided into this decision by others." Within minutes, the tabloids ignited. The headlines were brutal, screaming from every newsstand in Britain. "Camilla questions king's sanity. Palace rift deepens. War of the Windsors." The king's moment of profound vulnerability had been twisted into a question of his competence, and the accusation was coming from his own wife. Can you imagine a more vicious betrayal? At Buckingham Palace, it was utter chaos. Aides rushed between offices, phones ringing off the hook. The communications team was in a tailspin, debating whether to deny the leak or ignore it, but it was too late. The damage was done. In the court of public opinion, Camilla had just transformed from a supportive wife into a would-be usurper, scheming to hold on to power. At Highgrove, Charles sat with the newspapers spread before him. He stared at the headlines, his face unreadable. Finally, he sighed, a sound that carried the weight of decades of drama. "She's frightened," he said softly. "Not cruel. Power makes good people defensive." But Princess Anne, ever the loyal soldier, was having none of it. From across the room, her voice was like steel. "Defensiveness isn't the same as loyalty, brother. You've done what you had to do. Let the rest of us hold the line. That same day, Prince William faced his first brutal test as the de facto head of the family. As he arrived at Clarence House, reporters swarmed his car, shouting questions like weapons. Your Royal Highness, does the Queen disagree with the King's statement? Are you preparing for the throne? Will you respond to the leaks? William stopped. His face was pale, but his eyes were firm. He looked directly at the cameras. My father's health and his wishes remain our family's priority, he said, his voice ringing with authority. We are united, even when the world doubts it. Then he turned and walked inside, leaving the press corps speechless. Inside, Catherine was waiting. People see you as their anchor now, she told him. He ran a hand through his hair, the exhaustion clear on his face. I didn't ask to be their anchor, he murmured. But if I don't hold still, we all sink. The contrast was staggering. While William was projecting strength and unity, Camilla had retreated into a self-imposed exile. She fled to Highgrove House, her private residence. Reporters camped outside, their cameras flashing through the hedges. She was trapped, isolated, and for the first time in her royal life, she had lost control of the story. When her private secretary begged her to release a clarifying statement, she reportedly replied coldly, anything I say now will sound like an excuse. That night, the BBC aired a special documentary. It showed footage of a young Charles beside his mother, a teenage William at Diana's funeral, and finally the father and son side by side during the King's address. The programme ended with a simple, powerful caption, the father who built the bridge and the son who must cross it. Across the country, people wept. The nation's heart had chosen. They sided with the frail but courageous king and the son who was calmly picking up the torch. Later that night, the king and his heir spoke on the phone. Charles's voice was faint, but there was a hint of a smile in it. I hear they've crowned you the sensible one, he said. You gave them reason to, William replied. Then give them something greater, Charles whispered. Faith. It's all I ever wanted to leave behind. They didn't mention Camilla. The wound was too fresh, too deep. For now, the monarchy had survived, but everyone knew the family was fractured. As dawn broke over London, William stood alone in his study. On his desk lay a copy of his father's speech and a framed photo of them laughing at Balmoral years ago. He touched the glass. I'll carry it, Dad, he whispered to the empty room. Just rest. Outside, a soft rain began to fall as if to wash the city clean. The torch had been passed not through ceremony, but through sacrifice. In the days that followed, a strange calm settled over the royal household. The palace said nothing more. Instead, they acted. The focus shifted entirely to Prince William and Princess Catherine. They began to assume an even larger public role, their every move a quiet signal of the new order. William's first solo engagement was a visit to a children's hospice. The image of the future king kneeling beside sick children, his face etched with a genuine, quiet compassion, became the defining photo of the era. This wasn't the stiff monarchy of the past. This was leadership with a human heart. At Highgrove, King Charles found a peace he hadn't known in decades. He spent his days in the garden, watching the seasons change. It's strange, he confessed to a friend, to spend a lifetime fighting for relevance, only to find peace in surrender. Camilla, however, remained a ghost. Her absence beside the king was a glaring void, one that Princess Anne instinctively filled. She became a regular visitor at Highgrove, her steady presence a comfort to her brother. They talked about everything except the monarchy. Eventually, after weeks of silence, a short written statement was released from Camilla. Change is never easy, but my husband's decision reflects courage, not frailty. I will stand beside him in prayer, as I always have. It was a carefully worded surrender, a rare admission of humility. And for the first time, the public began to soften toward her, just a little. The crisis was over. William and Catherine settled into their new rhythm. Mornings filled with royal duties, evenings reading stories to their children, the balance between the crown and a normal. Life was finally within reach. One evening, Catherine turned to him and whispered, "You know, your father didn't just pass you the crown, he passed you peace." William smiled. "Then I hope I can keep it shining." This story wasn't just about a succession, it was about a profound lesson in dignity. In an age where leaders cling to power until their dying breath, King Charles showed the world that true strength is knowing when to let go. In his final act as an active monarch, he gave his people a lesson in humility, and in William's quiet, steady acceptance, he gave them hope. Together, they reminded us all that the strength of a legacy isn't measured in gold or titles, but in love and compassion. As Britain steps into this new chapter, it's clear the crown endures, not because of its glitter, but because of the love that holds it up. If this story resonated with you, I'd be fascinated to know where you're watching from tonight. Whether it's London, New York, Sydney, or somewhere in between, the idea of legacy connects us all. Let us know in the comments what legacy means to you in your own life. Your perspective adds so much value to this conversation, and it helps create a community where we can explore these powerful ideas together.